Now to our first conversation. We see the drama surrounding Nigeria's ability to refine its own oil continues as the Nigerian National Petroleum Company Limited continues to miss deadlines on bringing the Port Harcourt Refinery on stream. Well, join us to discuss the impact on Nigeria's economy is Dr. Muda Yusuf, the CEO, Center for the Promotion of Private Enterprise. Great to have you on the show. Happy Friday, sir.
Thank you, Ladi.
So,
to be with you.
Great to have you, Dr. Yusuf. So, we see the NNPCL admitting to challenges with the delaying of the Port Harcourt Refinery takeoff. So, I'd like you to paint a picture to how much funds these refineries are consuming, even in this state of no production and missing deadlines.
Well, I think there is already a consensus, even in government, that the model of managing our refineries needs to be reviewed. Because we have since realized that getting the public sector alone to manage the refineries had not worked for us. And that is part of the major challenges that the economy has been facing. That is one of the major factors responsible for the current macroeconomic challenges that we have: weak reserves, weak currency, and all these other macroeconomic issues arising from that. So, and I've heard, I think, either the Minister of Petroleum or GMD of NNPC saying that henceforth, going forward, the private sector, the NNPC will work with the private sector to manage the refineries. And for me, I think that is the way to go. Given the experience that we have had with the turnaround maintenance, even the cost that has been incurred over the years, and more importantly, given the fact that we have not been seeing much of value for money. The refineries have been down for close to 8 to 10 years. Of course, that is not sustainable. So I think we need to work around that consensus as part of the holistic reform for the oil and gas sector. We can look at other models, PPP models. It could be concessioning. It could be the NLNG model, where there's partial privatization. It could also be full privatization, whatever it is. Certainly, the current model is not working. And I believe that the current management of NNPC and even the government, has bought into that idea. That is the way to go, really.
I'm talking about maybe an outright sale at this point. Do you think they're ready buyers, for this state-owned refineries?
No, of course. It depends on the value. Now, by the time the work at all the refurbishment and rehabilitation of the Port Harcourt Refinery is completed, I'm sure the value will have been significantly enhanced. So that way it is to be easier to get a private sector partner. And for that refinery that have not worked for some time, again, it depends on what price you place on it. Once the price matches the value of the asset, of course, you get people to buy it. What is important is to get those refineries to work for the economy. Because this perpetual dependence on importation has done a lot of harm to the Nigerian economy. When we talk about forex issues, we talk about foreign reserves, we talk about inflation, we talk about revenue. A whole lot of it, has arisen as a result of the way that this sector has been managed. So I imagine that as part of the ongoing reforms, we will see a lot more pushback in terms of direct operational activity by the NNPC and government operation, and more engagement of the private sector, especially with respect to the management of these assets. And that way, we'll be able to get more value from those assets. And that is what is paramount, to get more value, to get them operational. How much we get from them is not as important as getting them to work and getting them to give some value in terms of jobs, in terms of employment, and more importantly, in terms of backward integration, in terms of energy security. But that is what is most important at this time. And the savings that will arise will not just come from the reduction in the importation of petroleum products. There's a whole lot of benefits even to the industrial sector. A whole lot of raw materials that will come from these refineries. So importation of raw materials, even from by the industry, will also reduce. So there's a whole lot of benefits around it, and we need to be very deliberate and act very, very quickly, to ensure that we go along this route as part of the total package of the oil and gas sector reform.
Looking at the deadline misses so far for the Port Harcourt refinery, do you think is some kind of miscalculation from the NNPC Limited, or could it be that they didn't gauge well, the scale of work required for bringing this refinery online?
Well, I think possibly, I think there was no proper evaluation of the volume of work or the challenges that it will entail, to bring the refinery, up on stream. From the statements I read by the communications person, I think there were a lot of unforeseen risks and challenges. I think that was how he put it, that they were encountering that had led to this series of shifts. But we are hoping that at least at some point, let's give them more time, they will fix it. But going forward, the model of operation needs to change. I think that is the only enduring solution, to all these hiccups that we have been having with the refineries.
And going into 2025 and beyond, what are you seeing for Nigeria's refining capacity? When it comes to refining our own oil at this point, and we're seeing a lot of volatility, in the oil market. Today it's supply disruption, tomorrow is demand expectations. But definitely Nigeria needs to start positioning, for what's to come, in that market. So what are you seeing for refining, going forward with all of these dramas that we still keep seeing at this time?
Well, the good news is that the capacity for local refinery is improving. We have seen what the Dangote refinery is doing, which is very commendable. We have seen the initiatives by the NNPC trying to put back on track some of the NNPC refineries, and hopefully subsequently get a public partnership model to continue to run them, so that we can avoid the political economy issues that have been impeding the progress of those refineries. I think that is very, very fundamental. Then, of course, we have seen some other modular refineries and all of that. But what is important in all of this is to give the right kind of policy support, because that is the way it is done all over the world. To support indigenous manufacturing processes and all of that with policy, especially fiscal policy. So if we have that, we'll get a lot more of these refineries to come on stream, and we'll be able to stimulate a lot more private sector interest, even in the NNPC refineries. Because what is important is the policy environment that we create to encourage this kind of things. That for me is the way to go. We need to give a lot more fiscal incentives, to be able to make them competitive. Because we are not just looking at domestic markets, we are looking at the regional market, we are looking at the continental market. Already we are already in the threshold of this African continental free trade area. We should be able to be a dominant player in the oil and gas sector, because we have the personnel, we have the entrepreneurs, we have the natural resources. So with the right kind of policy support, we should be able to leverage on all of this to be able to, leapfrog the economy in so many ways. So that for me, I think the outlook for me is bright, but we need the right kind of policy support to be able to unlock all of these opportunities and potentials in that sector.
All right, Dr. Yusuf, let's pivot now. It's rates setting season right now is upon us again, and we've seen some African countries report their inflation numbers for October. We've seen the likes of South Africa. They saw a reduction in their inflation rate. We've seen with Kenya also inflation coming down in those countries, and now South Africa is cutting rates at this point by about 25 basis points. Well, it's not the same picture in Nigeria. And next week we'll have an MPC meeting What are you expecting, and what is this telling us? Seeing other African countries kind of like meeting their inflation targets and already cutting rates.
Well, there are two sides to it. What I expect is different from what is likely to happen, because we need to situate our expectation also within the context of the mindset or the disposition of the monetary authorities. What I expect personally is that we should, avoid for now hiking of rates, because we are almost at the limit in terms of monetary policy instruments, using the instruments to tackle inflation. Already interest rate is over 30%, which is bad enough by any standard. Our cash reserve ratio is already 50%, which is also challenging enough. Our MPR is 27%, over 27%. It's one of the highest in the world. So for me, I don't think we need to push this any further. If the objective is to tackle inflation, I think we should be looking more in the direction of how do we scale up productivity? How do we support production? How do we give fiscal incentives? Because what the economy needs now is to address the issue of productivity and production, not to further tighten the operating conditions for businesses. That, for me, I think is very important. And when we are talking about also fighting inflation or dealing with liquidity, we should also look more in the direction of the fiscal policy, because we have talked severally about fiscal and monetary policy coordination. If the fiscal policy angle is generating a lot of liquidity, and the monetary policy is mopping up the liquidity, and the private sector is suffering the consequences of the mopping up of liquidity, then it's a challenge for the economy, because you are stifling growth, you are stifling investment. And this is a situation where there are so many headwinds that businesses are grappling with. So for me, what I will expect, or what I will propose, is that for now, the CBN should put on hold any tendency to increase rates if it cannot reduce the rates. Then we look more in the direction of fiscal policy. We look more in the direction of the economic stabilization bill. I hope that will also come up very quickly, so that we see the kind of incentive that the fiscal policy constituency is also bringing to the table. Because we need to reduce operating costs. We need to reduce production costs. Even if that will entail trading us some revenue, so be it. Because we need to create an environment to create more wealth, to generate more jobs. So for me, I think we need to deploy a lot more of these fiscal policy tools to address this inflationary issue, rather than committing more to this inflation targeting or this monetary policy tightening. That is my expectation.
Right. What do you think we can learn from countries like Kenya and South Africa that are already nearing their inflation targets and already cutting rates?
Well, I think what we can learn is to look at it holistically, because tackling inflation is not just a monetary policy phenomenon. So I imagine that in these other countries, a lot is happening around their fiscal operations. Because the way you manage your fiscal space will also determine the kind of outcomes you get in the monetary environment. So I think they are doing a lot in their fiscal space, reducing fiscal deficits, managing their expenditure, reducing exposure to debt, and so on and so forth. Those things are critical. So that way you have better complementarity, between the fiscal arm and the monetary arm. I think that is one key thing that we can learn, from these other countries.
All right, so we know another season that's right here is budgeting. We see the federal government and state government setting up budgets for 2025. We've seen for the federal government about 47 trillion. That's what they're looking to spend in 2025. Then the Lagos state government is looking at 3 trillion. They're the trillion level. That's for Lagos state. The governor presented that yesterday. How do you see all of this playing into, inflation and debt levels, going into 2025?
Well, we need to moderate the borrowing component of the budget. I think that is extremely important. Now, over the last 10 years, our public debt, I'm talking of public debt, not the national debt, has grown by over 900%. In 2015, our total debt was 12.6 trillion naira. As we are speaking now, our debt is 134 trillion naira. That's over 900% increase. These debt levels have serious implications for the macroeconomic environment. When we are struggling with the macro issues, these are also part of the problems. Because if debt is rising at a rate that is not commensurate to output, it creates a lot of macroeconomic issues. And if the cost of servicing the debt is also increasing, it's also an issue. Because before now we have prided ourselves as, doing well with respect to some key ratios in terms of debt to GDP. For many years, our debt to GDP was less than 30%. At the time, it was even 20%, 18%. And at that time, we were saying that we still had more room to borrow. But right now, our debt to GDP ratio is over 50%. So this is the time to begin to watch it, so that we avoid the risk of getting into a challenge of debt trap. We avoid the risk of kicking the can down the road, because we also don't want to create challenges for future generations. So we need to watch it very, very carefully in terms of the debt, particularly foreign debt, because foreign debt, because of the exchange rate movement, because these debts have grown so significantly again because of the exchange rate. So by the time you convert the dollar quantum of the debt into naira, you are dealing with a very, very big figure, and this has implications for debt service. And if the debt service is too high, it has a crowding out effect on the funding of infrastructure and funding on some other critical aspects of the economy. And of course, it has implications for the crowding out effect of the private sector or the financial market. So these are the wider implications. So we need to make it slowly. We need to look at it properly to ensure that we don't create more problems as a result of either the size of borrowing or the size of spending and all of that. So we should work more a lot towards fiscal consolidation. And more importantly, we need to create the policy environment to grow investment, to grow the GDP, to encourage more private sector. Because budgeting is about appropriation. Creating the right kind of environment for businesses to thrive. It's a fiscal policy matter. Your tariff policy, your tax policy, your regulatory policy, those things are critical. They are as critical as the budget. So as we talk about budget and appropriation, we should also be talking simultaneously about how we create the environment to complement the objectives of the budget, to encourage more private capital to come into the space.
All right. So, talking about debt levels, one government comes in, another one then leaves, and another one, comes. And, most of the time, different governments rake up, different amounts of debts, and you end up passing it on, to the incoming government. So I'm wondering, do you think the political class understand the ramifications of just, passing on these high levels of debt, and at what point can they be checked?
No, you see, we need to have a national approach to issues of economic management and macroeconomic management. There are policies and frameworks that should outlive any administration in terms of some fundamentals in economic management. So we should have, you have ratios, which are global ratios that have been accepted as, the threshold that you should stay within. Either you are talking about debt to GDP or you are talking about debt service to your revenue. Those are critical ratios. And these are standards. So as much as possible, no matter which administration is in power, we should adhere to some standard best practices in terms of economic management. Of course, that is very important. And we also need to take into account the vulnerability of the economy to exchange rate movement. That also has implications for debt. Because if foreign debt is growing and exchange rate is depreciating, it's a moving target. We'll be struggling to be able to pay. Some state governments now that have taken loans maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago, with the kind of, that took foreign loan, with the kind of depreciation, many of them are struggling now for debt that their predecessors had incurred. And for some of those debt, they can't even find any serious value. But again, the burden of servicing those, they have become very, very burdensome to some of these states. So the same thing should apply to the federal government. So you have a long-term view of economic management. That is why we have development plans. That's why we have 10-year plan, 50-year plan. So no matter the administration, even if we are going to bring some variance, the variance should not be too significant as far as the economic fundamentals are concerned.
All right, Dr. Yusuf, but before I let you go now, let's just fast forward, to the end of the term of this present government. Where do you see our debt levels, going by the body language of this government?
Well, it is very difficult to predict because some of these things, I think from time to time, we need to review our approach to some of these things in the light of the implications, in the light of the impact on the economy. Secondly, if going forward we're able to improve on our fiscal consolidation, by fiscal consolidation I mean the capacity to generate revenue without necessarily putting more pressure on economic players and on the citizens. If we're able to make that progress, maybe efficiency in tax administration and all of that, that may also help to reduce some of these pressures, in terms of debt accumulation. So fiscal consolidation is about also managing expenditure and also trying to optimize revenue. So those two sides of the equation are extremely very important to ensure debt sustainability. So I'm hoping that as we progress, the administration will take into account, and the economic advisors too should take into account some of these variables and the implications for the economy. I think that is what is most important.
All right, thank you so much. It was great having your perspective, Dr. Muda Yusuf, CEO, CPP. Thank you for sharing your Friday afternoon with us.
Thank you very much, Ladi. Thank you.